VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker here with my Basset Hound. This is Toby Bryant. He almost made a cameo a couple days ago, but he's here for real this time. So what we're going to do, along with this dog, we'll see how long he lasts in the saddle. We're going to talk about the Vikings offseason, in particular, the 4 most underrated moves of the last 4 months or so. We're on May 26th, so we're continuing a steady march to mandatory minicamp, doing OTAs at the moment, training camp July, 3 preseason games in August, and then week 1, September 10th, against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But a lot of stuff happened this offseason that kind of fell out of the sky that was unforeseen, and accordingly, some of those moves can be classified as underrated. So what I want to do, I ranked these, is go through the 4 most underrated moves, and we'll start that right now. And we're going to go in order of number 1 was the most underrated, if that makes sense. So number 4 was one of the very first moves personnel-wise. It was the acquisition, the free agent signing of Josh Oliver. Now, when that move happened, a lot of yous were like, a tight end, really? We already have TJ Hawkinson. What do we need another one for? Well, the Vikings want to run the football more in 2023. Last year, they ranked 3rd least per play calling, running the football. They threw the ball all over the place. And it didn't really matter because they were winning football games week after week in suspenseful fashion, so nobody really cared that they didn't run the football. Well, that messes up the time of possession. I know that we don't want to go back to the Zimmer era of that being the primary focus. However, when you don't really run it that much to the tune of 3rd least in the NFL, you're forcing your defense to get back on the field, and it was a defense last year that wasn't very good in the first place. So you're, putting yourself at a disadvantage. So they signed Josh Oliver to a pretty handsome contract. When you peel back the curtain on it, it wasn't, there's not a whole lot of guaranteed money there. However, his niche is run blocking. He's supposed to be a pretty decent athlete and pass catcher as well if something happens to TJ Hawkinson. But bringing him aboard was the shots fired moment, the smoking gun moment to imply, they're going to run the football some more. And even yesterday on Vikings.com, Alexander Mattison said that running the football more is a point of emphasis this September. So no matter how you dice it, also extending C.J. Ham's contract. They got 5 running backs right now. Dalvin Cook, Ty Chandler, Dwayne McBride, Kene Nwangu, and Alexander Mattison. And Alexander Mattison will probably end up as the RB1. But if the emphasis, per Alexander Mattison's lips, is to run the football more, signing a run-blocking tight end who has that emphasis is going to turn out to be an underrated moment. So I don't know if you'll grow to love Oliver because he's not a stat sheet stuffer, but it was a big move because schematically, one of the ways that they want to stave off regression is to run the football. So boom, you got a tight end pass or a run blocking tight end to do that. Number 3 is kind of along the same theme, not quite, but in the ballpark, is the drafting of Dwayne McBride in round 7. I've written and said on this show several times that if the NFL draft, if we threw the clock back 8 years, Dwayne McBride probably would have been about a 3rd or 4th round pick. And the Vikings got him in the 7th round. So there is a very reasonable chance, especially if Dalvin Cook is jettisoned sometime this summer, that you could look up week 1 of 2024, so a year and a half from now, and McBride could be the guy at RB1. We don't know how Alexander Mattison will do as an RB1, hopefully pretty well, but his second year of his extension isn't, loaded with guaranteed money. So Dwayne McBride could very well be an underrated move because the future could be really, really bright for him. Even our pal who's been on this show about 4 times, Yannick Eckhart in Germany, he writes for Vikings Territory. His bold offseason prediction was McBride wins RB1. And when you're making bold predictions, you're supposed to be a little outlandish, and I think he knew that. But McBride is a workhorse type. He doesn't or hasn't caught the football out of the backfield like a pass catcher at UAB, but he is the type of running back that, if they would have drafted him in round 4 or 5 just because, he would have been the guy, or he could be the guy at RB1 for a lot of teams, especially those that fancy running back by committee. But Dwayne McBride, along with Ty Chandler, those are the youthful options, at least, Chandler isn't crazy youthful. He's older than Alexander Mattison. But those two are the future of the running back room for the Vikings, especially if Dalvin Cook leaves, and Alexander Mattison is more of a one-year trial. But McBride is built for a substantial carry load, and if something happens to Mattison or they're disenchanted with Chandler in a couple months, McBride is the type of running back that you could nominate as RB1, especially in a Los Angeles Rams-like committee that checks notes won a Super Bowl a year and a half ago. That's number 3. Number 2, counting down to number 1, is the retaining Kyrus Tonga. And this, we didn't know at the time that Dalvin Tomlinson would for sure bolt for the Cleveland Browns for, was it 4 years, $57 million? I'm very glad the Vikings didn't dish out that contract to a defensive tackle. I love Dalvin Tomlinson, but not at that price point. But Kyrus Tonga was very quietly in a moderate sample size. I think it was about 300 defensive snaps. He was damn good last year. He was kind of like Duke Shelley that came over from, I think they both played for the Bears at some point, came over for cheap. We're supposed to just be camp bodies, maybe practice squad if they got lucky. And then, the roster trim downs hit and they both got cut. Neither one of that occurred, to them. And for Tonga, he ended up playing because Dalvin Tomlinson was hurt for a few games. And when he played, he was great. And if you look at the Vikings' current defensive line, there's really no big-bodied nose tackle types aside from Jaquelin Roy, who was just drafted, and he's not quite as big as Tonga. So Tonga, at least for his body, is a throwback to the Linval Joseph run-stuffing days of these Vikings. And I think that Tonga is in line to start because if it's not him, then who is it? Especially if they maintain a large human in the middle of the defensive line. Now, Harrison Phillips is big, but he's not your prototypical, let's just say it, fat nose tackle that's right in the middle of the defensive line. And I don't know if I'd say Tonga's fat, but, he's 330 pounds or something like that, 340 pounds maybe. And he is the type of dude that you would line up as a nose tackle. And they got him for 1 year, $940,000. And that is 13 or 14 times cheaper than Dalvin Tomlinson. So there's one big hinge for this plan, and it's that he's good. Again, Tonga was the 13th best interior defensive lineman per Pro Football Focus. I think it was like 77.8 was his PFF grade or something like that. Well, now he's got to go do it again, and he'll have the weight of expectations, especially if he's a starter. We have to figure out if it was a flash-in-the-pan season, kind of like Raiders fans will figure out with Duke Shelley in Las Vegas. But if all of these camp battles kind of go according to plan based on the current standing of the depth chart, Tonga should win a starting job, and it'll be up to him to prove that 2022 was not an outlier. And when you get him for that cheap, $940K, that is a very underrated move, especially if he plays as well as he did last year. All right, one more for you. It is number 1, the most underrated move of this Vikings offseason. And I guess I'm getting a little flexible with underrated. Guys and gals like you and me who do live and breathe this stuff as, your foremost hobby, it might not be underrated, but it's the undrafted free agent class. So there was a point, I think I said this on another show, I can't remember if it aired on this channel. There was a point during the NFL draft, right after they selected Addison, that was the big moment, we're going back to 3 deep, baby, I can't wait. There was a point on Friday night and Saturday afternoon where we were all kind of I wish we had some more picks. I wish we had a way to trade to get Joey Porter at the start of day 2. I wish they had more that they could work with. Well, they traded for TJ Hawkinson, so by default, he's the de facto second-round pick for the 2023 Vikings. And then they traded last year's draft capital for a Caleb Evans, who played last year. And then on top of that, if you can use that perspective to define the draft class, it's all of those guys. Let's see if I can rattle them off. Jordan Addison, Mekhi Blackman, Jay Ward, Jaquelin Roy, Jaron Hall, Dwayne McBride. You're like, okay, that'll work. But if you put TJ Hawkinson and Caleb Evans in there, then you start to say, oh, now we're cooking. The plan makes sense. Well, what you need to also do when you're giving that perspective some light is the undrafted free agent class. 2 in particular, Ivan Pace Jr. from Cincinnati, an inside linebacker, and Andre Carter from Army. Those guys weren't supposed to fall out of the draft. I swear to God, in some mock drafts, and I did a bunch because that's the nature of the beast, they were like 3rd rounders and 4th rounders, and nobody wanted them in the NFL draft. Now they're pissed. They got, fuel and chips on their shoulders. Good for them. And they play for the Vikings. So as soon as the draft capped, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah got on the phone and lured them both to Minnesota with, fatter contracts than most UDFAs get. And bada bing, they now play for the Vikings. And it's noteworthy because it seems like more than just buzz from guys and gals like me that are like, Ivan Pace and Andre Carter, they're big name guys. They're going to be. They actually sound like, from what coaches are saying, that they're going to be roster pieces and at the very least practice squad members. And if they turn into something, either one of them, well, maybe one of them flames out and he's cut August 10th. And then the other guy makes the roster. And if that guy eventually starts, it's going to be a big damn deal that they found him after the draft for cheap. It's almost like, if you're watching these NBA playoffs, every time I turn on the Miami Heat, the narrative is they got more undrafted players than they do drafted players. It was awesome the first 2 times I heard it. Now they say it 18 times per telecast. But that's going to reasonably be the Vikings if Ivan Pace somehow gets meaningful defensive snaps as a rookie or eventually gets a starter's job. And the same for Andre Carter. His world should have ignited for the better when Zadarius Smith was traded to the Browns on May 12th because that's a roster spot. Andre Carter, if he wants, he's got the, 6'7" or something like that, and he had the body of work in 2021 with those 15 sacks. Like, the guy is designed to wreak havoc, against quarterbacks. So, if either one of those guys break out and they turn into starting caliber Vikings, this UDFA class will look back and we'll be like, how did that happen? Almost like we look at the 2015 draft for the Vikings. They were able to get Danielle Hunter in round 3, Kendricks in round 2, and then, by the way, Stephon Diggs in round 5. And by Viking standards, NFL standards, that was considered like, wow, Rick Spielman really knocked that out of the park. Conversely, and similarly, if the Vikings find something in Pace and Carter and they actually get time on the field and they play well, we'll look back and think, wow, the fruits of our labor came from the undrafted free agent class. That's spectacular. So, recapping, since I'm not cool enough to type it all up as I go, or I don't have a graphics department, so to speak, number 4 is the acquisition of Josh Oliver because it proves the Vikings are going to run the football more, which they desperately need to do to help their time of possession. Number 3 is drafting Dwayne McBride, a commodity that 8-10 years ago probably would have been a third rounder. Number 2 is Kyrus Tonga back for $940K. 13th best interior defensive lineman in the world. Let's see if he can do it again. And number 1 is the potential of an undrafted free agent class. Like the 2 biggest, best players in the UDFA class, they went to the Vikings. And that's pretty sweet. All right, we'll be back Monday. I'm not sure what we'll talk about on that day, but something will come to mind. Tuesday, we're back with Brett from Vikes Central. Wednesday, Josh Fry. And I'm working on a couple more guests that should be revealed soon. All right, Skol, baby.